Coming to you from 4,200 feet in the hills of Oregon, it's the voice of Chi-Town, the reddest beard in the high desert, your host of the MOA Broadcast, Sam Wilson. All right, folks, we got a great show lined up for you today. This is going to be one of our true crime episodes, and the subject today is the Gemini Twins. The Gemini Twins were two ruthless enforcers for the DeMeo crew, which is also going to be a topic for discussion in today's episode. These guys were part of the mafia based out of New York City in the 60s and 70s, I guess, and on into the 80s, kind of depending on where you start their career and their action. That being said, we got a great show. Now, as usual, we try and keep this a PG show, but you should know that if there are young ones in the room with you or listening to this, some of the details of these killings are a little on the graphic side. So you make a decision on what's acceptable for you and your family. That's not my job. Just giving you the heads up. Some of these guys were crazy. That's the thing. It seems like a lot of them tried to out-crazy the next one, and the Gemini Twins and the whole DeMeo crew, in fact, were no exception. This gets pretty crazy. So I'll quit talking. As you know, we try and keep this to about a 35 minute format. If you have any suggestions, feedback, questions, concerns, whatever, feel free to shoot us an email at info@gearconvoy.com. That's info@gearconvoy.com. For more information, go to gearconvoy.com, and you can find our website there. There's all kinds of info on the MOA broadcast, along with our U.S.-made survival gear and knives, and a whole bunch of other products you might enjoy. So, that being said, we're going to jump right into it, and we got a great show lined up for you today, folks. Thanks for joining us, and here we go. Who were the Gemini Twins and the DeMeo crew? The DeMeo crew were a group of mobsters and associates within the Gambino crime family, operating primarily in Brooklyn, New York, under the leadership of Roy DeMeo, a soldier in the family. Supervised by Gambino capo Anthony Nino Gaggi, the crew was active from the late 60s to 1983 and became infamous for their prolific criminal activities and gruesome methods of disposing of victims. They were likened to a modern-day Murder, Inc. due to their efficiency and brutality. Key members. The crew consisted of a mix of made members, associates, and recruits, many of whom were young, ruthless, and loyal to DeMeo. Some notable members included Roy DeMeo, their leader, known for his businesslike approach to crime and creating the Gemini Method. Chris Rosenberg, DeMeo's protege, a savage killer and key earner until his murder by the crew for causing trouble with Cuban drug dealers. Anthony Center and Joseph Testa, the Gemini Twins. Close associates, expert car thieves, and prolific hitmen who later joined the Lucchese family. Henry Borelli, a top hitman, currently serving a 100-year sentence. Criminal activities. The DeMeo crew engaged in a wide range of illegal enterprises, generating significant profits for the Gambino family. Auto theft. They ran New York's largest stolen car ring, stealing 4 to 7 cars nightly for sale overseas. Loan sharking. DeMeo started as a loan shark, expanding this operation under Gaggi. Drug trafficking. They dealt in narcotics, despite Gambino rules against it, causing internal tensions in the family. Extortion. They often targeted businesses like Paul Rothenberg's pornography operation. Murders. Suspected of anywhere between 70 to 250 killings, often using the Gemini Method, which consisted of luring victims to the Gemini Lounge, killing them, and dismembering their bodies for disposal at the Fountain Avenue landfill. A more in-depth explanation will be covered later in this episode. Primary individual members. Roy Albert DeMeo, born on September 7, 1940, in Flatlands, Brooklyn, New York City, emerged as a prominent figure in the American underworld, particularly within the Gambino crime family. His life, marked by a stark contrast between family devotion and brutal criminality, offers a compelling case study in organized crime dynamics. Early life and family background. DeMeo was the fourth of 5 children in a working-class Italian immigrant family from the city of Formia, on the Mediterranean coast of Lazio, Italy. His father, Antonio Joseph Anthony DeMeo, worked as a laundry delivery man and passed away in 1960 from a heart attack, while his mother, Eleanor DeMeo, was a housewife who later returned to Italy with their youngest child. The family faced tragedy early on, with DeMeo's older brother, Anthony Frank Chubby DeMeo, killed in the Korean War on April 23, 1951, at age 20. DeMeo graduated from James Madison High School in 1959, where he was classmates with notable figures like Walter Block and Bernie Sanders, and began working as an apprentice butcher at a local grocery store from ages 15 to 22. This early exposure to manual labor and community life likely shaped his later criminal endeavors, which started with loan sharking during his teenage years. DeMeo's personal life included marriage to Gladys Rosamond Britton in 1960, with whom he had 2 daughters and 1 son. The family moved to a custom-built home in Massapequa in 1966, reflecting a degree of financial success likely tied to his criminal activities. Raised Catholic, DeMeo stopped practicing, and his children were raised Lutheran, highlighting a personal shift possibly influenced by his criminal lifestyle. Despite his brutal profession, he was described as a devoted family man, a duality that adds complexity to his character. Criminal career and the DeMeo crew. DeMeo's criminal career began in earnest with his association with the Lucchese crime family, but by 1966 he had shifted allegiance to the Gambino crime family under the supervision of Capo Anthony Nino Gaggi. He headed the DeMeo crew, a group of approximately 20 associates involved in a broad spectrum of illegal activities, including murder, car theft, drug dealing, prostitution, and pornography. This crew became notorious for its efficiency and brutality, particularly in the 1970s and early 1980s, operating primarily out of the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn. The crew's most infamous contribution to organized crime was the Gemini Method, a standardized execution and disposal process named after their hangout. This method involved luring victims through the side door of the Gemini Lounge into an apartment, where a crew member, often DeMeo himself, would approach with a silenced pistol and a towel, shooting the victim in the head and then quickly wrapping the towel around the wound to stanch blood flow. Another member, originally Chris Rosenberg, would stab the victim in the heart to prevent further bleeding. The body was then stripped, dragged into a bathroom, and hung upside down to drain blood, and dismembered on plastic sheets in the main room, with arms, legs, and head cut off. The severed body parts were then bagged, placed in cardboard boxes, and disposed of at the Fountain Avenue landfill in Brooklyn, opposite the Starrett City apartment complex on Pennsylvania Avenue in East New York. This landfill, receiving massive daily garbage volumes, made body discovery nearly impossible, and an early 1980s investigation to excavate it was aborted due to cost and low likelihood of finding evidence. The landfill closed in 1985 and is now parkland, with all signs and evidence it was a landfill erased. Some victims' bodies were alternatively left in streets as a warning, or disposed of at sea using a cabin cruiser owned by crew member Richard Denome. The DeMeo crew's activities extended beyond murder to include loan sharking, auto theft, hijacking, and narcotics, despite a Gambino family ban on the latter, as well as operating peep shows, bestiality, and child pornography rings. DeMeo joined a Brooklyn credit union in 1972, using his position for money laundering, and formed an alliance with the Westies, leading to his induction into the Gambino family mid-1977. His FBI mugshot, dated July 14, 1981, marks a point of law enforcement interest, reflecting the growing scrutiny on his operations. Death and legacy. DeMeo's criminal empire first began to unravel in April 1979. DeMeo chased down and killed an 18-year-old vacuum cleaner salesman named Dominic Ragucci after mistaking him for a Cuban hitman. The incident marked the beginning of the end for DeMeo, as his fellow Gambino mobsters decided he could no longer be trusted. His paranoia made him too much of a liability. But in the end, DeMeo had good reason to be paranoid. Things finally came to a violent and bloody end with his disappearance on January 10, 1983, and the discovery of his body on January 20, 1983, in the trunk of a Cadillac Coupe de Ville at the Varuna Boat Club in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. His body, found with a chandelier on top, bore multiple headshots and a defensive hand wound, indicating he may have been trying to ward off additional gunshots during his brutal murder. The circumstances of his death remain speculative, with theories suggesting he was killed by his own crew, fearing he might turn informant, or by orders from higher-ups in the Gambino family. Though police initially suspected Anthony Gaggi, Lucchese boss Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso told a different story. According to him, Gambino boss Paul Castellano wanted DeMeo dead, and he worked out a deal with Casso to clean up the loose ends. Reportedly, Castellano wanted DeMeo's whole crew taken out, likening them to serial killers that had gone kill-crazy. However, Casso realized how dangerous that would be, so Casso then made a deal of his own with Center and Testa, the Gemini Twins. He assured them that if they took care of DeMeo, they would be spared. So, on January 10, 1983, DeMeo met up with a few of his men at Patrick Testa's body shop in Brooklyn. After he entered the shop, DeMeo sat down, and then Anthony Center and Joseph Testa came out blasting. He had been shot in the head multiple times, including once behind both ears, which was allegedly a signature method of the Gemini Twins. After his body was discovered at the boat club, DeMeo was buried at St. John's Cemetery in Queens, New York, marking the end of a violent and bloody reign of terror. As for Gaspipe Casso, he was true to his word. With Roy DeMeo dead, Anthony Center and Joseph Testa became members of the Lucchese crime family. However, by 1986, the Gemini Twins' murderous streak had begun to catch up to them. But first, we start at their beginning. The Gemini Twins. Anthony Center and Joseph Testa, often called the Gemini Twins, were childhood friends who became key figures in the DeMeo crew, known for their brutal efficiency in organized crime. They earned their moniker due to their inseparable partnership and their involvement in the DeMeo crew's operations out of the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn during the 1970s and 1980s. They were deeply involved in murders, car theft, and other crimes, notoriously employing the Gemini Method, a product of their boss Roy DeMeo, which involved luring victims, executing them, and disposing of their dismembered bodies at a landfill, making them feared figures in the underworld. Anthony Michael Center was born on March 31, 1955, in Midwood, Brooklyn, New York, to parents of Italian descent. His father, Michael Center, was Northern Italian, and his mother was from Rovereto, Italy. The family name was originally Cente, later anglicized to Center. Raised in a family with ties to organized crime, his uncle Robert Center was associated with the Gambino and Colombo families. Anthony was introduced to criminal activities early on. He worked for his father's debris removal business and his uncle's sanitation company, both of which provided a front for illicit operations and laid the groundwork for his later criminal involvement. Joseph Carmine Testa, known as Joey Testa, was born on January 24, 1955, in Brooklyn, New York. His brother Patrick Testa also became a mobster, joining the DeMeo crew. Testa grew up in Brooklyn as one of 9 children. His father was a transport truck driver, and his mother was a housewife. As a youth, he became close friends with Anthony Center. By the age of 15, Testa had already been involved in criminal activities, including car thefts. His early offenses were dismissed due to his juvenile status. One story from their youth shows how they became close from an early age, the beginning of a long association with each other. When Testa was 15, a 13-year-old neighbor was mugged by a knife-wielding Puerto Rican man from East New York. The assault victim complained to Testa, who gathered Center and some other associates and led the group in a borrowed car, spending the entire day searching for the assailant. Another story, possibly a variation or combination of the previous incident along with some other activities, goes that in 1973, Testa was nearly killed in a bar fight with a Puerto Rican opponent when the assailant's knife punctured his lung. Center hunted the man down and nearly beat him to death with his fists. Chris Rosenberg, mentioned earlier as an associate and crew member of Roy DeMeo, hired Center and Testa to wash and wax his vehicles and steal cars for him. Rosenberg then introduced them to Roy DeMeo, who asked them to join his crew. DeMeo, Rosenberg, Center, and Testa became the core of the DeMeo crew. This is when their criminal careers really began to get serious, as the DeMeo crew was a notorious subgroup within the Gambino crime family. Known for its extreme violence, the crew was suspected of between 75 to 200 murders from the mid-70s to the early 80s. As mentioned earlier, regarding their close association with each other, Center, alongside Joseph Testa, earned the nickname Gemini Twins due to their close friendship and frequent presence at the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn, a home base for the crew's operations. Center and Testa quickly became integral members of the crew, known for their ruthlessness and reliability. Their roles quickly expanded beyond car theft to include carrying out hits and other violent acts on behalf of the crew. Center gained a reputation for providing the crew with significant revenue from auto theft. Although Center was a large earner for the Gemini Lounge crew, he was highly disliked by Albert DeMeo, the son of Roy DeMeo, the crew's leader. Albert's personal judgment of Center was that there was something slick and phony about him. First known murder involving use of the Gemini Method. Andrei Katz was a Romanian Jewish immigrant who moved to New York City in 1956 with his family, settling in Brooklyn. His parents, Holocaust survivors, raised him alongside a younger brother, Victor. At 22 years old, he worked as a foreign car mechanic at his father's shop and became involved in illegal activities, including auto theft and drug dealing, working with the DeMeo crew under the Gambino crime family. This was a course of action that would have grave consequences for Katz. In late 1974, tensions escalated between Katz and the DeMeo crew, particularly with Chris Rosenberg, after Katz was arrested for a stolen vehicle and blamed Rosenberg. This led to Katz being severely beaten and hospitalized by crew members Joseph Testa and Anthony Center. While recovering, Katz either shot Rosenberg in revenge or had it carried out in his behalf, though Rosenberg survived through sheer luck, one bullet hitting him in the lower jaw, another his right arm, and a third that was aimed for his chest merely glancing off. Surviving what should have been a fatal shooting, Rosenberg was reportedly furious. His jaw was left disfigured from the bullet wound. Despite undergoing reconstructive surgery, from that point on Rosenberg wore a beard to mask the scars that resulted from this attack. Marking a series of poor decisions that had serious consequences, in January 1975, Katz provided information to the Brooklyn DA about Rosenberg's auto theft, and in May 1975 he testified before a grand jury about the crew's activities. These events had a detrimental effect on his lifespan, likely marking him for retaliation of the permanent kind. On June 13, 1975, Katz was lured to an apartment complex in Manhattan under the pretense of a date with Babette Judith Questel, who was acting as bait for the DeMeo crew. He was abducted by crew members, including Rosenberg, Henry Borelli, Testa, and Center, and taken to a grocery store's meat department in Rockaway Beach, Queens, where Roy DeMeo waited. Research suggests Katz was stabbed multiple times in the heart with a butcher knife, likely by Rosenberg, who was still beyond furious over his attempted assassination and subsequent facial disfigurement. After Katz was already dead, his body was stabbed over a dozen times in the back, again presumably by Rosenberg. Katz's body was then stripped of its clothes and dismembered, likely chopped up by DeMeo and Testa, both former butcher apprentices. After the corpse was decapitated, one of the men, presumed to be Rosenberg, crushed the head with a machine normally used to compact cardboard boxes. Because of the damage done to the remains, dental records had to be used in order to positively identify the victim as Katz. His body parts were then wrapped in plastic and disposed of in the supermarket's dumpster. Although the woman used as bait confessed her role soon after learning about Katz's murder, she was unable to identify Rosenberg. Borelli and Testa were arrested, however, and spent months in jail while waiting for trial. They would secure an acquittal in January 1976, but the case would come back to haunt the surviving members of the crew in the late 80s, when a federal and state task force targeted the DeMeo crew. It was reported that Rosenberg later claimed Katz's murder had driven DeMeo and his crew to decide that any future conflicts would be settled in a similar manner of dismemberment to make the victim disappear. Thus began the years-long string of brutal slaughterings known as the Gemini Method. The duration of the 70s would see Rosenberg, along with the rest of the DeMeo crew, commit many more savage slayings. The victims included suspected informants and other mobsters DeMeo and his followers were contracted to kill. Dominic Montiglio, who visited DeMeo frequently to pick up payments for Anthony Gaggi, said in an interview that if the crew didn't kill at least 3 people a week, they would be depressed. Some were shot to death and left to be found in order to send a message, but the majority of murders committed by the crew followed the same slaughterhouse protocol outlined above, the Gemini Method. Crew members who became government witnesses all contend that during the time period that Rosenberg was alive, he was always the crew member who stabbed the victims after they had been shot in the head. These same witnesses also claim that Rosenberg usually did the stabbings, as well as the subsequent dismembering of the body, in his boxer shorts or underwear, in order to avoid staining the expensive clothes he wore. Unbeknownst to him, Rosenberg himself was on a collision course with a brutal and violent end. In 1979, he traveled to Florida to set up a cocaine deal with a former associate of DeMeo's named Charles Padnick. In a somewhat complex deal with 2 Cuban drug merchants known only as Pepon and El Negro, Rosenberg made the fatal mistake of double-crossing El Negro. From Florida, a group of 4, comprising Charles Padnick, Serrano, as well as the cousin and girlfriend of Serrano's Cuban drug connection El Negro, flew to New York to meet with Rosenberg to facilitate the deal. Rosenberg, along with other members of the DeMeo crew, shot them all soon after arrival in New York and reportedly chopped them up, disposing of the bodies. When the group did not place a phone call to El Negro that evening letting him know everything was all right, Padnick's son was then sent to New York to find out what happened. The son was also murdered and chopped up by the crew. Contact was eventually made by the Cubans to the Gambino family, and a deal was worked out that if Rosenberg was executed for his actions, there would be no further reprisals from the Cubans. But one of the conditions was that the murder had to be covered in the local newspapers so that the Cubans could believe it actually happened. DeMeo was forced by his superiors to deal with the murder personally, due to the gravity of the situation. This was particularly difficult for him as he was Rosenberg's mentor and viewed him like a son, with Rosenberg even referring to himself as Chris DeMeo sometimes in business dealings. Due to his personal conflict, DeMeo stalled for a number of weeks. After a period of inaction on the part of the Gambinos, the Cuban drug lord sent a group of enforcers to New York and threatened violence if Rosenberg was not murdered soon. It was during this period of high tension that DeMeo very publicly shot and killed the vacuum cleaner salesman, Ragucci, mentioned earlier. He mistook the 18-year-old for a Cuban hitman. It was during this period of high tension that DeMeo very publicly shot and killed the vacuum cleaner salesman, Ragucci, mentioned earlier. He mistook the 18-year-old for a Cuban hitman, but he was reportedly just taking a break in his car in front of DeMeo's house as he worked his way through college selling vacuums door to door. This was the last straw, and DeMeo was told to finish Rosenberg before there was any more public collateral damage. Rosenberg was apparently unaware of the Cuban situation and thus had no indication that his life was in danger. On May 11, 1979, he went to the regular nightly meeting with DeMeo and crew. As he sat at the table with his associates, DeMeo pulled a pistol out of a brown bag sitting on the table and shot Rosenberg in the head, wounding but not killing him. When Rosenberg got up off the floor and stumbled onto one knee, Anthony Center stood and shot him 4 more times in the head, killing him. But he was not going to be dismembered, as was the usual custom. They put Rosenberg's body in his car and parked it on a street near the Gateway National Recreation Area in New York City. Crew member Frederick Denome then drove by the vehicle while Henry Borelli raked it with machine gun fire to ensure the murder was a blatant enough assassination to guarantee that it would be mentioned in the local newspaper. This gave the Cubans proof of the killing and diffused the situation. Associates claimed that for years afterward, DeMeo expressed genuine regret at having to kill Rosenberg. Aftermath and imprisonment. Several years and several murders later, including the 1983 killing of their boss, Roy DeMeo, the Gemini Twins finally found themselves at the end of an ever-shortening rope. Prosecutions for various crimes, including conspiracy to ship stolen cars and murder, began in 1986 and continued on until the twins were successfully prosecuted 3 years later. On September 14, 1989, Center and Testa were both sentenced to life imprisonment. Center served his sentence at the United States Penitentiary, Allenwood, Pennsylvania. Testa served his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institute in Terminal Island for crimes that include multiple murders. In 1994, Center's cousin, Dominic Vulpes, who owned a garbage company, discovered that pension contributions were being paid to a Teamsters pension account in Center's name. A court investigator determined that $30,000 of contributions had been paid into the account over a 6-year period, while Center was in prison on a life sentence. Union officials said Center could have qualified for a pension of $1,400 a month if the payments by Canarsie Recycling had continued for another 5 years. It was determined that Center will not collect the pension. The Teamsters disqualified Center as a member, and the pension fund rejected his pension claim. It is unclear whether Center's cousin, Dominic Vulpes, or the garbage company he owns received a refund of the fraudulent contributions. Despite the grisly nature of their crimes and the fact that they received life sentences, changes in parole eligibility laws allowed them to become eligible for release. Testa was paroled in April 2024 at age 69 after serving 35 years, while Center was released in 2023 at age 68. The story of the Gemini Twins is a stark reminder of the brutal realities of organized crime in New York during the late 20th century. Despite all of their ruthless brutality Anthony Center and Joseph Testa were part of a small group of people to be involved with violent slayings in the mafia for years and make it out alive. All right, folks, what a wild story. I mean, can you imagine going through all those things in your life and you'd have to imagine being in that line of work. You'd have to be constantly scared to death, wondering if you were going to be the next one to get whacked. A lot of these murders, they took place by their friends, and they were invited over someplace. It wasn't like they told them, all right, you're in trouble, we're coming after you. They just wound up someplace to eat dinner or to hang out, and they got killed. Okay, folks, that's going to do it. Make sure you stop by gearconvoy.com. Check out the MOA Broadcast tab and all of our other good stuff we got there. We've got video episodes on Patreon and so forth. If you have any questions, concerns, feedback, or whatever, ideas for a show, hit us up with an email at info@gearconvoy.com. Otherwise, it's going to go ahead and close out this episode of the Make It Out Alive Broadcast True Crime Edition. So remember, folks, don't wait until you have an emergency to prepare. If you wait, it may be too late. If you don't make it out alive, you don't make it out at all. Stay safe out there, folks.